they land on you. And it's no big deal.
I don't know.
They just.
I was told you could pet a honeybee and not have to worry about them stinging you.
I would not suggest that that's a good routine plan for most people. I would basically just let them do whatever it is that they're doing. And yeah, there was a guy on a video I saw from Europe who had a kind of a handlebar mustache and whatnot, and he had a frame of bees in front of him, and he was stroking them with his mustache and saying, see, they like it, they like it. Now, come on, let's be sensible about this, okay? We know honeybees for what they are, and they're not pets. They can be trained, but not trained to do things that we necessarily want them to do, but we can train them to sugar syrups and odors and a bunch of other things, but they're not domesticated animals. We just have to keep that in mind. They're kind of wild, but they're being nice to us.
Yeah. My name is Blain Eldrid. I'm here to interview on bees. Could you please tell us who you are, a bit about yourself?
Sure, Blain. My name is Eric Mussen, and I have a PhD in entomology from the University of Minnesota. And in my PhD thesis work, I worked on honeybee virus diseases. And after that, I came out here to UC Davis and was hired as the extension apiculturist for the state of California. And I've been here since 1976 in that capacity.
Any negative history working with bees? Has there ever been anything that is just...
Yes, I have my one negative event. I guess we all do. One evening, well, I guess two, but one evening we decided to move some bees, and I didn't get all my bee suit on and whatnot. It sounded real easy. We were just going to pick them up and move them, and that didn't work quite as well as I expected, and I was kind of brand new to beekeeping. And so my professor and I were putting him in the back of the truck, and the thing slid around, and the bees came out, and I ran away. And he said, come back here, come back. He was getting stung a little, not much, but I ran away. And the only other time we ran into trouble was one time we'd shifted and moved around quite a few of the hives, and the next day we wanted to move just one of them from one place to another. And we picked it up, and on the way of moving it over, but this time it was with the person that was a student that was working with us, it slid also, and some bees came out, and it wasn't too bad. We weren't all dressed in our suits again. We were just going to move this one hive, and they got him on the ankles. And unfortunately, he happened to be allergic to bees. And so under those circumstances, we were in St. Paul, and I stuck him in the car. We went the wrong way on the one-way streets, and I took him over to the hospital, University Hospital in Minneapolis, which is that's a ways away, and parked out where the ambulances parked, and ran in with him very quickly, and he was in pretty tough shape. And so they pressed the emergency button, and they had him under control in a couple of minutes, and then they came out and told me, who's illegally parked out there in that emergency spot? Yeah, right, okay. So yeah, once in a while things can happen. But if you think ahead, it shouldn't happen, because you can figure out what might happen and just prevent it from happening. So we could have prevented both of those had we dressed up the way we should have, etc., etc. But sometimes after you get used to being around the bees, it seems so simple to just do something that we do it.
So bees are fairly predictable, and if you know their behavioral patterns, we can be right next to them like we are right now and not have to worry about being stung or about them being very aggressive.
No, there's not, the bees are not going to show defensive behavior unless they have gotten some kind of a stimulus to, I don't know, they can't think like us, so we could say they feel like they're threatened, or you can't use that because they don't know what threatened is, okay? But there are certain stimuli that will induce defensive behavior. And our standing here would normally not be that kind of stimulus.
Okay. So, what would it take to aggravate a beehive?
Well, if we purposely wanted to see whether or not these bees are on the low side or the high side of the defensive behavior threat, all I would have to do is bang on the side of the hive a couple of times, and that would rattle them enough, to find out just exactly what their true colors are when they come out. Yeah.
What would you say is the safest distance to be from a hive without I guess, being noticed by the hive? You said they could feel vibrations as we approached.
Yeah.
Do you know like what the distance is at which we were noticed?
Well, you know, I don't know for certain, and this wouldn't apply to the bees that you have, but I do know that down in Southern California where they have Africanized honeybees, there were some that were living up in the fellow's eaves and up under his roof and whatnot. And another person came out and started a lawnmower 3 houses down. And they actually felt the vibration from the lawnmower because bees are deaf, they can't hear. So they felt that vibration from the lawnmower and actually went after everybody in that whole area out there. But fortunately, that's not the type of bees that we have. So if I were working with these and I made a big mistake and the bees came up and started to sting and whatnot, my guess is that we could just go from here over to that screen house, which is probably, I don't know, 75 feet away or something like that. And only a couple bees might come with us. I mean, they're just, the bees that we purchase from the commercial bee breeders and whatnot are just not that, I don't know what you want to call it, defensive. They don't tend to just stick with you and chase you all over the place. Once in a while, you'll get an individual bee, for whatever reason, who thinks that's her job. And under those circumstances, you know, will follow us from here all the way back to the building or whatever. But there just aren't that many of those. And those of us who've been around bees for a while don't really concern ourselves very much about being stung. Being stung is part of what happens. It's never more pleasant than it was the time before. But most of us build up some antibody in our systems that get the components, the antigens or allergens out of our system long before it can get into where the other kind of antibody is on our lung, heart, and those places that causes anaphylaxis. You know, so most of us we're just more immune, and most people aren't susceptible in the first place. If you want the statistic we think, never tried it on humans, the statistics we think is it takes about 8.6 stings a pound to get to an LD50. So if I'm a 200-pound person, we're not quite, but we're approaching, you know, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 stings before I'm going to die of being stung. Right? And with my protective antibody, I can take more. But I would be a sick person physically if I were stung that many times. I mean, the venom would get in me and I'd feel it, but I would survive it. It wouldn't be any fun. But anyway, I would say you could almost work as hard as you possibly could, and about the most things you can get out of one of these beehives is about 200. It's the Africanized bees that will exceed 2,000 stings sometimes, but those are not what you're going to have.
Definitely not. So in society, there's been this fear that's developed that, you know, bees are to be feared and to keep your distance. You know, if one lands on you, you're to kill it instantly upon sight, because most people, you know, they've been walking through a field, they've kicked a bee, and then it's stung them, and then from that point on, they've had this horrific fear of bees. But is that fear really justified?
No, well, the first thing we'd want to do if the bees happen to be crawling on you would be to not swat it and squish it. I mean, if you bang it and you haven't killed it, well, now you've completely changed the relationship between you and the bee, and it's likely to come back, this time not being very friendly. Okay? If you squish a bee, the alarm pheromone, as we call it, the odor that's associated with the sting, will then be on you wherever you squish the bee. And that targets you for the next sting. So that's the last thing you want to do, is squish a bee on your body. But no, there's no, well, okay, people have a fear of stinging insects just because they sting. And there have been individuals that have actually, you know, driven what appears to be, doesn't even have to be one, what appears to be a stinging insect is inside the vehicle, and they'll run off the road and hit a tree because they're concerned about, okay, how bad is that sting? I mean, come on. It's just not that bad. They're not fun, but it's not something that you drive off the road. I'm sorry. And those of us who keep bees, if we go out and we help people with their bees or whatever, and we bring our suits back in, and the bee happens to be flying around in the car, and we don't have our veil on or anything, we don't even worry about it anymore. I mean, if it stings, it stings. They don't generally. They try to get out the window. But, you know, a sting isn't that bad. It really isn't.
And So, would a lot of people kind of have this weird idea that bees are going to leave the colony and go out and hunt students on the campus looking for targets to sting? You can assure us that's obviously not their behavioral pattern, right?
No, the only time the students might get into trouble, and I don't know how under the circumstances you're intending to use that this could happen, because you're going to be inside that total fenced-in area.
Yes.
Okay. All right. If somebody were, I'll give you the worst case scenario. If somebody would take a broomstick and start banging and banging and banging through the fence and hit the bees, okay, and I saw it was on the edge of a baseball field, and the people were out there playing baseball, maybe the left fielder would have some visitors.
Yeah.
But you'd have to have somebody out there poking them with a broom handle or something, and you're not going to have that. So no, generally speaking, the fact that they're way over in the corner, and that everybody else is somewhere else doing whatever they're going to do, that's not going to be a problem.
Okay. Have you heard of any lawsuits that go with bee stings, like a neighbor suing their neighbor because of a beehive, or students suing the school because of too many bees on campus?
No, I haven't heard exactly that. Have I heard of lawsuits? Yes. Generally, though, they're because of some sort of negligence. The thing that happened shouldn't have happened, but it did happen, and then somebody gets hit. And one of the times, somebody was driving a tractor and took the corner too sharp, and a portion of the equipment the tractor was pulling knocked the hive over, and the bees all went flying out, and it just happened that there was a pedestrian close enough, a general public person got all stung up, and there was a suit. But I mean, if they hadn't been tipped over, there wouldn't have been a problem. Yeah. And then they're down in Southern California where they actually try to trap the Africanized swarms and then kill them before they can do anything. Well, one of the companies forgot where the trap was and didn't go back to it often enough, and it filled completely full of bees, and they got too heavy for what was suspending it, and people were walking by, they always had been, and one day it just fell. And when that happened, it burst open, and of course, if some people were walking by, and one of them got pretty badly stung, and that person sued. So I mean, yeah, there have been some of those sort of things. Generally, at the municipal level, neighbors don't sue each other. What happens is they get into a fight over a fence, they get into a fight over a tree, or something like that, okay? One of them keeps bees and the other one doesn't. So the one that doesn't keep them says, well, if I can't get you with a fence and I can't get you with a tree, I'll get your bees. Yeah. And so under the circumstances, they claim that they're definitely allergic and that this is a threat to their health and all this kind of stuff, And they, well, in some cases, they try to pass ordinances that won't allow you to keep bees, all right? But with the current interest in honeybees and whatnot, they've kind of mellowed out on that. And many of the ordinances now will basically say, as long as you're abiding by the rules, you can have these bees. Now, would I ask if I wanted to keep bees if my neighbors truly were allergic? I mean, deathly allergic? Yeah, I'd ask. Because I don't want to hurt anybody. Okay. But under the circumstances, if the bees are handled properly, they should never be over the fence in a defensive behavior. I'm sure they'll be over the fence visiting the flowers. Yeah.
So, you were stating earlier that you found 75 different species of bees just in the weeds growing around the building.
Well, where we are here,
yes.
Yeah, it's actually, you can kind of barely just see the fence over there, but there's an acre and a half.
Yes.
Oh, I think it's an acre. Or was it a half acre? I don't know, it's not very much, but we've got a little Haagen-Dazs Haven bee garden out there. And before, when it was a weed patch, we had about 50 species of native bees in it, and after we converted it to a honeybee feeding area, we still have 50, but 25 of the old ones left, 25 different ones moved in. We have no idea where they live and where they come from, but that means that there are 75 species of native bees somewhere right around here.
So bees are all around us. Is adding a beehive on campus really going to change that population?
Well, the interesting thing is there are some people who feel that if you introduce honeybees into an area, they're so good at competing that they're going to actually use up all the food source, and you're going to end up with honeybees and all your native bees disappear. Well, this garden right over here proves the point, because on a daily basis, this bee colony, once it gets up and gets going, is going to require an acre equivalent of food every day. Now, it doesn't mean they have to have an acre patch they can all go to. That's nice, but that's not the way it generally is. The honeybees can actually fly out to 4 miles around the hive, and that's a 50 square mile area in which they have to find the equivalent of an acre of blooms to work. okay? So we have way too many colonies in here for that half acre over there to help, right? I mean, they're over there, but it's not providing very much of their food. And yet we've got 50 species of native bees working right in there with them. So obviously we haven't hurt the native bee species or population very much.
There are a number of yearly blooming flowers on campus, so bees will be visiting that, but there's not going to be a huge population of bees on campus every day because the plants do have to replenish their bee products, and then also the bees are going to be traveling in those 40 square miles you spoke of for other food sources.
Well, I would just have to temper that slightly and say, if on your campus you have something that's really highly attractive to bees, let's say you got a few almond trees growing out there and they come into bloom. All right, your bees will be tickled. They're going to work it, okay? But if there's bees elsewhere in the neighborhood within flight distance, they may be tickled too. So you may get these trees just swarming with bees, and they're not even all your bees. They're your bees plus others.
And that also brings up an interesting point. If a student were to get stung on campus for their own reasons, wouldn't it be very difficult to prove that it was actually one of our bees that stung the student? Wouldn't they have to bring in the corpse of this bee to really prove anything?
No, but I don't think they would bother to do what they would have to do. You know now that the molecular biologists are pretty good at determining things. Okay, the sting mechanism, if it's still in the person, has enough tissue with enough DNA that they could go ahead and amplify the DNA. Then they would have to run down the row and find, they'd go straight to your bees if they thought it was your bees and do a DNA amplification from your bees to see whether they match. If they don't, it would turn out to be somebody else's bees somewhere else in the neighborhood, which is quite likely because bees tend to, overlap with each other, and it's sort of a community pollination that's going on. So your bees wouldn't be the only honeybees around anyway.
Do you feel that the risks and the benefits outweigh each other? So the risk of having a beehive on campus being, the possibility that a student gets stung, outweighs the benefits of the ecosystem, the community, the fact that we'd be getting honey that we'd be using to educate students. For Dr. Shrib's classes, they're going to be coming out and learning directly with the beehives. Like, risks and benefits, are they outweighing each other?
Well, the only risk that I'm really aware of is that the bees, for whatever reason, might get out and become defensive and sting one or more people. That's basically your only risk as such. The benefits, I think, are higher. If you talk about commercial individuals, some people think it's like a factory, and all they're doing is keeping their bees to make money, but that's not really what's going on. If you talk to any of them, they're concerned about those bees, just like they'd be concerned about livestock if they had livestock or whatever. I mean, it's a lot deeper relationship, but the commercial people are out there for that purpose. But even they, and especially the people in the backyard, they're backyard beekeepers, they just sort of like to sit down and watch what's happening. Watch what kind of pollens are coming in because they're different colors, and see, get a feel for what's going on. It makes people feel, I don't know, it kind of mellows them out. If they've been having a rough day and they go home and they watch their bees, they kind of, finally, here's something that works. And I don't know how your students will or will not get, how deep they'll actually get into the hive. My guess is that if you're going to be the bee person or whatnot, every once in a while you're going to have the class out there. They can stand around the outside of the chain link. Now, chain link doesn't sound terribly protective, but the interesting thing is that the bees will become used to that being chain link, and they hate flying through a fence as long as they go over the top and down. So what's going to happen is all your bees are going to basically go up and fly out, and then they're going to fly out and come back down again into it. Okay, so you can get inside and you can smoke the bees the way you're supposed to and lift these combs up, and then you can actually show the people outside what's going on.
And they don't need bee suits on, maybe just the person handling the rack?
Yeah, they shouldn't have to, okay? And the other thing is, if they're the right type of bees, you can take one of those frames and go down and then pull it back up quickly, and all the adults get dropped back into the box, okay? And that's fine. They shouldn't come out and get you. We could demonstrate that. We're not going to, but we could demonstrate that if we had our equipment. But anyway, then you can show them exactly what's going on inside the cells because now there's nothing in the way. Otherwise, it's completely coated with bees and you can't see what's happening inside. So you can shake the bees off and you can show them what's going on, put it back in again, close it back up, and pretty soon all the bees get back to what they were doing, and it's fine. So yes, I think there are many, many more advantages than disadvantages to having it. Besides that, if you're going to have these gardens and whatnot, they are going to pollinate. And they're excellent pollinators. Not because they're the most efficient pollinators. There's enough studies out there to show that native bees on a visit-by-visit to the flowers are much better pollinators than honeybees. But the reason we can use them and get the job done is we can just load them on a truck and bring in so many that we've completely saturated the crop to the point that it's visited over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And even if a honeybee only gets the job done in one of every 5 visits, okay, or even one of 10 visits, they're going to be visiting more than 10 times and they'll get the job done. Whereas one of these native bees that's out there, who knows, 1 or 2 visits and the job's done. Yeah.
Do you know much about bee sting insurance or policies pertaining to bees? Maybe one that the school should be aware of?
Okay, as obviously the university is self-insured. So if something nasty happens, and I did put out signs. You see these signs out here that say no trespassing, because we had individuals who were coming out here, and I hope at least they had some idea of how bee colonies work and whatnot, but they would actually lift the lid and look inside to see what was going on. Well, you got a couple of problems here. No smoke, which generally really brings the defensive behavior down, okay? And the fact that they glue all their equipment together with what we call propolis, as resinous material like pine pitch, and they glue everything together. Well, if you pull this up, it goes crack.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so anyway, well, it would be bad enough if an individual was doing it and he or she got stung, but sometimes they had little kids like this coming with them. And I thought, what are you doing? I mean, I know how to keep bees, and I wouldn't have a little kid with no equipment on standing that close and pop the lid without smoke. So I put up the signs, please stay away. But that's what was going on.
So if we had a 6-foot fence, and it's not just chain link actually. Dr. Shrub's telling
slats
me
too.
He was telling me that it's a non-climbing fence, so it has more give to it, so it'd be very difficult for one to actually try and climb over it.
Well, that's good.
And there's a locked gate. And we're going to put English and Spanish signs like what you have here, saying authorized personnel only. Just the fact that there's a beehive here.
Right.
You feel that's enough signage and enough to really deter someone from trying to get in?
It will deter everybody except the wrong people. And I don't care. Some people actually make it a challenge to see if they can get behind your sign and bother the bees because they know you don't want them to. Okay. Can we stop those people? No. Are there very many of them out there? Fortunately, no. So we have not run into what you and I would refer to as vandalism out here in all these colonies that we've had ever. Okay, but we're not in an area where that's so likely to happen. There aren't thousands and thousands of people running around our campus.
And if that individual were to be climbing over fences and directly disobeying the English and Spanish signs, could they really hold the school or us liable for getting stung?
I don't know if you'd win, but can they bring a suit against you? Yes. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Right now you can bring a suit against anybody for anything, okay? If somebody pushes it very far, though, when you start asking questions, it's like somebody suing because they fell through the ceiling and got hurt on the floor. Well, what were they doing there? Well, they were going to rob the place. Well, all right, there aren't very many judges, or if it went to juries that are going to say, you know what? I don't think it matters that you fell through the roof. For what you were doing, you deserve what you got. And it would be pretty much the same thinking. If somebody went out of their way to ignore your signs, climb in, beat things up and whatnot, my guess is they would be hard-pressed to find anyone that would basically say, well, didn't you have some idea what was going to happen when you did that? So I think the answer is no, there wouldn't be a problem. Beekeepers, of course, have policies. Now, a backyard beekeeper will frequently ask, is it on my normal home insurance? And frequently the insurance company will say no, but you can have a rider. All right? So as a rider, what a lot of them do is they just get themselves what's called an umbrella policy. And that covers everything that isn't covered distinctively on your automobile and on your home insurance. It's another global insurance that goes beyond that. And at this point in time, to tell the truth, I don't know of any individual homeowner or whatever, or any school or anything else that's ever been sued because their bees stung somebody.
Are you aware of any problems as was to people who are allergic to bee stings and problems that could arise on school campus having students that are allergic?
Well, all I can say is that, first of all, the number of people who are deathly allergic to bee stings, probably numbers maybe 1 in 1,000 or something like that, okay? And those particular individuals frequently know who they are, and if they're concerned about the possibility of being stung, they'll be carrying some kind of an EpiPen or something like that, so if they get stung, you know, you can get an epinephrine injection into themselves and then get them to the doctor. So they're very, very infrequent. Now, there are a lot of people that react to bee stings by swelling up. I mean, so will I. If I get stung in the back of the hand where there's no tissue, yeah, boy, I look like I'm wearing a boxing glove. But if I turn my hand over and I get stung over here where the muscle is, I don't even notice. I mean, I feel it, but it doesn't do anything. It's stung here, swells up. You get stung in the face, it swells up, okay? Well, that's an allergic response. It's not life-threatening. It's just a big nuisance, okay? So there aren't very many people out there that would be very likely to be stung and then go into anaphylaxis. And again, unless they were standing right there inside with you and you're opening the box or something, you'd be hard-pressed to determine where on earth that particular bee came from, because contact between stinging insects and humans happens periodically anyway. If you have your car window open and you're driving, sometimes it just happens that one flies in and immediately whacks against you or something like that, and you get stung. I mean, it happens once in a while. But I don't see that this would be any more. Obviously, the person who knows that he or she is allergic to bees is not going to run over to your fence and look at them. I mean, common sense would tell you that wouldn't happen. So I wouldn't really be concerned.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about if someone does not know they're allergic but are allergic. They've never been stung before, they have no clue. And so we have 2,000 students on campus. So if one doesn't, and they get stung by a bee while they're on campus, what type of medical response is there, and what does the school need to do to respond to that?
If an individual who is allergic to bees actually is unaware of their allergy, gets stung by a bee, what are some of the medical responses the school should do to protect his student?
If the individual truly is allergic, all right, and highly sensitive, then that person is probably not going to live much longer than 20 minutes. So whatever is done has to be done quickly. And I don't know whether or not you have a resident nurse on campus, anymore, because a lot of schools don't. Okay, what the person needs, and the only in the law, what the law reads is what the person needs is a shot of epinephrine or adrenaline. Okay, and if they're carrying that thing and they jab themselves with it, that's self-administered and that's cool. All right, but if you know what's happening and they can't, they're getting afunctional, but you know it's there, and you jab it into them, you've broken the law because you've administered medicine without a license. That's true. The Good Samaritan thing may or may not hold, okay? If the person kind of responds well and then you get them to wherever the medical place is closest to the school, which is where you would go as quick as you could get them there, okay? And they survive and whatnot, they'll probably be very thankful you did it. If, however, the person happens to succumb, then you'll probably be right in the middle of the big suit over the death. And I guess the other thing is, and this wouldn't happen too often, but if the person that got stung was very, very old and had a really weak heart to begin with, that adrenaline rush that you get out of that might induce a heart attack. So there's the two things, that could happen. The person might not make it and you'd be in the suit, or the person might be killed by it. So if you jabbed it into an old guy like me, they might go down from a heart attack, and if that's the case, you'd be in even more trouble. But there should be that EpiPen available. It can be self-administered by anybody who would need it, And that will take care of that first 20 minutes at least. And by that time, someone on campus ought to have a vehicle that they can take the person and transport the person to some medical place. And then the medical people can take care of it no problem at all, because they'll give antihistamine, and they'll give a little more adrenaline if they have to, and they'll give a steroid of some sort. And between all that, they just recover in a matter of minutes. They're all ready to walk out the door and say, I want to go, and they'll say, no, wait, you can kind of get a delayed response here, so we're going to have you sit here for a couple hours, 3 hours, then you can go. That's what normally happens.
So if we were going to put a bee motel for local bees, not any that we've brought in, on the center of campus, are there anything that we really need to know about, or things you should tell us?
No, if you're talking about what we refer to as a domicile for the native pollinators, okay, there's only a couple of things you have to know. Number one, the bees in there, although they have a sting, don't sting people, and they just don't do it. Okay, so you're not going to have any sting problems whatsoever. If you want to get a nice variety of individuals that happen to nest in holes, you would use different diameter holes, and you sometimes will get things other than native bees in those boxes as well. Okay, the only things you have to consider actually to do this is, number one, if it's very, very, very warm in the summer where you are, they may get too hot, so you'd want to have them shaded in the afternoon. Okay, and the other thing is depth. When you put these blocks out there, you want to make that deep enough so that when the female is bringing back the pollen and the nectar and making these nectar balls and laying an egg on it, sealing the cell and moving forward up to the front of it, okay, at the front end she puts in unfertilized eggs and they're males. The back end's where the females are, and they're the important ones that you want in your garden and whatnot. Okay, if your block is only that deep, what do you get?
Males.
All males. Okay, you don't want to do that. So make sure, okay, that your block's deep enough, that your drill hole goes way back there. Okay, and then the other thing is, they don't like hives that swing. I mean, there are birdhouses that can swing and you can get away with it, but they want theirs to be steady. So you fasten it at the back to get against something that's sturdy. They can get morning sun till mid-morning, late morning, and then after that you'd prefer that they have shade so that the little bees in there don't cook. Yeah. But they're absolutely safe. You've got no worries about stings from those bees.
Great. I was told that bees, once they leave the hive, they're typically going to go out and then straight up over any object that's in their way, whether that be a chain link fence or a tree, and then they'll stay at that height until they reach the destination, in which they'll go directly down. What this tells me is that they will fly up and over the students, so we're not going to have bees flying through campus. They're going to be going up and landing on their location. Is this fact true?
Yeah, well, what the bees tend to do is, yes, they fly up, and you can see some of them that are out here right now, and they're all flying at about maybe 9 feet or something like that, and they tend to stay 9 feet above whatever is there. So they're always kind of going up over the trees and down and whatever. The only time they come down to they may work on these flowers that are out here by our feet, then they're going to go right down here, okay? But coming back, once they've learned that they had to come up and go out, they're going to be coming back high. And they don't come in low and then go way up and come over and come down. They're coming in as high as the top of the fence in the first place. So if you've got a 6-foot fence, the bees are coming in at 6 feet or higher. Probably closer to 9 feet, because that's where they tend to be, is 9 feet above everything. They'll come in at 9 feet, come down that right in. Yeah. And so people walking underneath, it's absolutely surprising when you do something like that. You have them in your backyard, and they're flying over the neighbor's house, or they're flying over the sidewalk and everything, okay? And people just don't even notice. I mean, they know a bug flew over them, but they aren't at all concerned about what it is and where it's going. So as soon as this kind of just, what you and I would call out of sight, out of mind, it isn't a concern anymore.
Is there anything else you would like to say to the school board or to our supporters that would support getting a beehive on campus?
Well, there's a lot of interest now in honeybees. There always had been a little, but I mean a lot of interest now, because we're having a problem keeping the colonies alive. And we aren't sure why that is. There's a lot of stresses on these honeybee colonies, and in some cases it's too much for them to bear, and down they go. Okay, so because of that, I think there's been a real change in how the general public actually thinks about honeybees as well, which means that instead of raising a ruckus because somebody in the family got stung like they might have before, they're just going to say, well, in those honeybees are good. I mean, there's no reason we really want to get rid of them. We just got to be a little bit more judicious about what we do so that we don't have a sting problem. Okay? And I think that's changed a lot. And many of the larger cities, Washington, D.C., New York City, and a lot of places like that, they just prohibited beekeeping. Well, it never exactly prevented beekeeping because people kept them up on the roof and on their balconies and a few other places. Had to get rid of them if they were reported, but it didn't seem to be a problem. They've all pretty much backed off. And now what they're basically saying is, honeybees are really good, and we think it's okay. Go ahead, have them. Yeah. So under the circumstances, I think now we've got the general public on our side, and they're much more accepting of bees and an occasional sting than they used to be. So I would say this is probably the best time to consider getting things going before or if the regulations ever tighten back up again. You'll sort of be grandfathered into what you're doing. So I would say yes, get them on campus, go for it.
Thank you very much. This has been a great interview.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, nice seeing you. To this as the Haagen-Dazs Honeybee Haven. Okay, and yes, it's a garden. It's a demonstration garden. And back when we were first hearing about this problem with colony collapse disorder, the Haagen-Dazs people said, wow, if we lose all our bees, we're going to lose the fruits that we put into our frozen desserts. So perhaps we should try to do something to help out a little bit. So what they decided to do was to infuse some money into the University of California and Davis and some more into Penn State University to try to work on research and whatnot. And then another idea came up, well, it sounds like malnutrition, lack of food is one of the bees' big problems. So maybe we should try some kind of an educational program to tell people about that and get them to plant more bee food or something like that. And their idea came up, why don't we do a demonstration garden at the university? So they put out the word worldwide that they're going to run a contest for a design of a garden. And I believe it was people from either Sausalito or Sassoon, I think it was Sausalito, actually turned in the winning plan. And then a combination of interests got together to help put it up. But it doesn't really matter, so here it is. And it's set up in such a manner that there's some commercial crop pollination around that edge of it. There's some flowers that you can plant in the home garden that are supposed to be good over there. And then there are places where there are the wild flowers that the bees just like and use. So we set this up as sort of a feeding place for honeybees, but it's really small on a comparative term because the honeybees need so much food a day to feed themselves. Okay, so we really aren't feeding the bees very much because we have too many colonies right over there. But interesting, there are people who said, well, honeybees and wild bees don't get along together. The native bees, you bring in a lot of honeybees and it just sort of gets rid of the wild bees. Well, when this was a weed patch, before it was converted into something a little nicer, there were about 50 species of native bees out here working the field, well, we call it the wild morning glory. Field bindweed is sometimes called. There were some icky thistles out here, but they were here. There was about 50 species of these native bees working around in this area because the retired Professor Thorpe over here has been checking on that for decades. Okay, so we scratched off all the weeds and put in this garden. And then we wondered, I wonder what's going to happen. And we tried to fill it with honeybee plants, not native bee plants as such. And what happened was there was a transition in the native bees. Of the original 50 species, we've only got about 25 of them left. But unexpectedly, they've been replaced by 25 other species of native bees that weren't flying around in here at first when it was a weed patch. So we still have about 50 species of native bees working in this garden. And they're not terribly selective, and they work right in there with the honeybees. I mean, you'll see two bees, different bees on the same head at the same time. The native bees tend, on a nice day, which this isn't, to get up a little bit earlier in the morning. So they get a pretty good head start on the bees before the honeybees even get going, and kind of do a pretty good job of collecting what they need. But they're here all day. All the bees are here all day. Hummingbirds are here. Butterflies are here. Praying mantises end up being here in big numbers. Some spiders, but not too many, because we had some volunteers in here who were fastidious about getting rid of weeds and keeping everything looking nice. And if they saw spider webs, they just sort of eliminate the spider webs. They didn't do anything to the spiders, but to keep it pretty and whatnot. So that's what we've got here, and it's attracted attention from all over the United States. People come here from quite a ways away just because they want to see it. And other countries are saying, tell us more about this. We want to know a little bit more. We'd like to put one of these in too. But the Europeans were sort of ahead of us anyway. They've already worked hard on their hedgerows. They've already worked hard on these sort of plantings as well. It's a little bit newer here in the United States, but it's catching on. There's a number of places that are doing this now in urban situations and whatnot, trying to provide some food for the bees.